Welcome back to another video about the gun ban and going into the future. Now, in the previous video that I did, which absolutely blew up, I was not expecting that, so thank you for the support. There was quite a few questions about what we have now and what we will have. There was also a few foreign viewers that were curious about what Canada is like now with the recent bans. And I think it might be a good idea to just go over what we were expecting in 2025, what we will now not have in 2025, and what we will have. So, first of all, I'm just going to go over what we will not be getting in 2025 that we were expecting. Number one is the Iron Guns Chico. This is the PSA... what do they call it? Hold on. All right, I've completely forgot the name. The PSA Jackal. That was the Jackal upper that was supposed to mate to our AR-180 lowers. That will no longer be coming. The SRV2 Badger will no longer be coming. The WK-180 Gen 3 is no longer coming out, which was technically just the Gen 2 with an updated upper. It didn't have a new FRT, but again, that's not happening. The R18 Mark III, which is very disappointing, is not coming out. And again, I believe this is also related to the PSA Jackal thing that was going on. Another gun that was hotly anticipated for 2025, I thought it would already have come out by now in 2024, but it seemed like it was being pushed back, was the Springfield Hellion. That will no longer be coming out in 2025, unless, of course, later in the year. Again, if you want to know more about when all of this could be undone, watch the previous video. That will tell you more about what could potentially happen in the future for what could be undone. This is just talking about the state of the Canadian firearms market. So, no more Hellion. And now that leads me on to the next thing, which is guns that were actually expected to come out or have come out and aren't on the list yet. Now, before I get any comments about this, I'm not informing the RCMP of anything new here. There is absolutely nothing new that I'm informing the RCMP about that they don't already know. Reminder that in the press conference they said over and over again there will be another ban come February or potentially March, depending on how quickly they actually get it up and going. But the reason that they're doing that is because they're mostly filled with some of the controversial firearms, such as the SKS and the M1 Garand. Essentially, the reason they haven't done it now is because they need to find some PR ways to get around the bad press. Because this has already been bad press for them. There's next to no support for this besides their anti-gun friends. And no one in the gun community really is even, I mean, they're upset, but they're not like doom scrolling about it because we know this is just going to get undone. So this hasn't gone down the way they probably hoped, and that's assuming that they did it for votes and not for other reasons. So all of these guns that I'm about to talk about, the RCMP knows about them. It's not anything new. It's just worth noting. Number one, which was interesting, was the ATF SPR-9 Glock type rifle. Now this is a rifle that probably wasn't actually going to see the light of day anytime soon. We thought it was coming out sooner, and then they had to change a bunch of stuff. So this is essentially a rifle that uses all Glock parts, except the lower is a proprietary lower that has certain features on it that make it distinct from a Glock. This was not named in the list, so it theoretically could be released if they can get it out before the February bans. But again, this is a candidate that will probably be banned in February. So another one that I can't bring up right now because I'm not allowed to show any store pages is the Crusader Arms Crypto. Now, there's a lot of speculation in the comments about why it was left off. I think it's pretty simple of why it was left off. It doesn't have an official FRT yet. And yes, they could have named it, but they were saying that the RCMP is the one that came up with the list. And the people that came up with the list use their own list, which is the FRT, to find guns. And so if it's not in their database yet, but it's in the process of being in their database, then they just might not have put it in the list in time. the likely outcome for the crypto is twofold. Either it'll get banned in February by the time it has an FRT, even if it's given a non-restricted FRT, or the second option is that it'll just be given a prohibited FRT right from the get-go, and then it'll just be named later in February anyway. So I wouldn't expect that to last, just FYI. Another one that was left off the market is the Henry Homesteader. It's a semi-automatic that looks like a normal rifle, like it looks like an old school kind of rifle with wood furniture and everything. This one may or may not be left on the ban list. We don't really know, but to be honest, doesn't really matter. I expect it to be on the ban list in the future. I think really anything that is semi-automatic centerfire will be on the ban list come February, including the SKS and the M1 Garand. And if you want to take a look at any guns for yourself, you can go to armalytics.ca. This is not a store, YouTube. This is not a store. This is a database. It's a database of all of the firearms in Canada that the RCMP has seen and whether they're prohibited, restricted, or non-restricted. Now, you need to pay attention right now. It's only updated as of November 18th. So everything that happened on December 5th that became prohibited is not on their website yet. If you want the list of everything that became prohibited, you have to check out the Gazette, and that will give you the list of everything that is now prohibited. This will give you a list of things that were prohibited in the past, and you can cross-reference with the list to see what still exists as non-restricted or restricted. So keep that in mind. Next thing I want to talk about is magazine capacity. There was a brief mention about this in the previous video, but I didn't really touch on it much because I don't think it matters too much. But for some catch-up on what our current laws are, for those that aren't in Canada or don't know, essentially the way it works is that every semi-automatic centerfire long gun, so rifles and shotguns, have to have 5-round magazines. And for handguns, it's 10 rounds. Now, where this becomes a little murky is that if you were to, example, have a shotgun tube that accepts longer shells and it's marked as such, and you use smaller shells in it, you can get more capacity legally. That's totally fine. As you can see here, this is the part on the RCMP's website. Magazines designed for one firearm but used in a different firearm. They cite 2 examples. This one is the most easy for most people to understand. The Ruger PC carbine, which is now prohibited, used Glock magazines, and therefore it was allowed to have a 10-round capacity, even though it was a semi-automatic long gun. And that was true of a whole bunch of things, including LAR-15 pistol magazines, which are Stanag pistol magazines. Also XCR pistol magazines, and they had them in 308. And of course, like I said, the shotgun tubes also fell into that category. This is potentially where we could see a change, but I believe it requires legislation. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to say that 100% confidently, but I am fairly certain that it would require legislation to change this, not an order in council, because it would be a change to the Firearms Act itself. Because the reason these are allowed is because of the language in the Firearms Act. So if the Liberals were to change it so that all long guns would be limited to 5 rounds, no matter what, then they have to change it in the Firearms Act. And if they were to do that with that exact language, there would be a lot more guns that would be screwed. If you have a semi-automatic rimfire gun, there's no magazine capacity. If you have a gun that has a dedicated magazine that is manual action, so pump or tube, so pump or bolt or, I don't know, single load or whatever, there's no magazine capacity. Any of the manual action arms, if they are limited to 5 rounds, could also be really screwed, especially if they're internal magazines. It could actually literally break some guns. There is some danger there to that, but again, this requires legislation, I believe, and for legislation to come into effect between now and the next scheduled election is already slim. But if they were to introduce this in March, as they said, then they essentially have March, April, September, like a week of September, and October, like a week of October, and that's it. I don't think they have enough time to get anything through any legislative process. Even if they were to fast track it, there's no guarantee that anything would go through because it's just so much time. Like C21 they ended up fast tracking C21 towards the end of the SECU study period. It still took like an extra, 4 or 5 months in the Senate. So I just don't see any legislation coming through. I could be wrong, but that's why I'm not worried about the magazines. But again, you never know. Now, one thing that they could change without needing legislation is how the magazines are pinned. Because of these magazine capacities, every magazine in Canada is modified to fit those requirements. And typically the way it's done is it's a rivet and a pin that blocks off the follower from moving past a certain number of rounds. And they want to target those specifically because that's the most popular way to do it. And so they could theoretically change the import process unilaterally so that any new magazines coming into the country have to be done a different way with either a welded plate or like a crimped body or something like that, where it can't be undone as easily theoretically. That one is a real concern, but again, it theoretically could only last, if they do this in March, then it could only last like 6 months. And if you already have the magazines, what's stopping you from using the ones you already have? So maybe, again, stock up on some magazines if you really want. With everything that we can't have and we're expected to have and won't have out of the way, what are we left with? Well, what we're left with is essentially manual action arms. You can come and look at Armalytics yourself, again, database, not store, and you can filter through all of the things that we have left. So all you want to do is pick whatever category you want for what's left on the Canadian market for people to buy who just got a license today. For example, it would be rifle and shotgun, and that's it. It would be non-restricted or restricted. It would be a multi-barrel, a bolt action, a single shot, a pump action, a lever action, or a revolver. Now I'm leaving out air, spring, and gas because they are technically air guns, which may or may not classify as firearms, but I'm going to leave that out for now. And one more search filter for you, because otherwise it would capture too many other things in the other one. Reset the search filters, and you can go affected by order in council, click no. You can click rifle, and then scroll down to 22LR, click that, and then click semi-auto. Those are all of the semi-auto rifles that are still legal, that are in 22 caliber. Again, November 18th, so the GSG 16, 15, all that are going to be on this list and say non-restricted, but the only 22s, it shouldn't be any 22s, but the only 22s that were banned from the last few days are the Chris Vectors, the Keltec SU-22s, these GSG 15, ISC MK-22, the ones that vaguely look like scars, and the GSG 16, and the STG 44-22. Every other 1022 is still here. Whether they stay here or not, who knows? I think they will. Oh man, it would be a crazy long shot for them to prohibit them, but you can never officially rule anything out. And that's what you have left. Most of these are going to be really unappealing to a lot of people. But again, I implore you to remember that this should only last a year, at most. Actually, not even a year, 10 and a half months at most. While we probably won't get ARs back and handguns back for a couple of years, the things that we lost a couple days ago, those will be able to get back in probably 10 and a half months. Of course, nothing's guaranteed in life, but the chances of the Conservatives coming in and extending the amnesty while keeping things banned is, in my opinion, very unlikely. Now, finally, this part will just be for essentially foreign viewers or people that are new to the firearms market in Canada. Again, timestamps in this video for the specific purpose. The way that Canadian gun laws work, and will likely remain to work for the foreseeable future, is that you need a possession and acquisition license to acquire a firearm, which means you need to go do a Canadian firearms safety course, or you need to do the Canadian Firearms Restricted Safety Course, which is the restricted one, which, to be honest, doesn't really have a purpose right now because it's primarily focused on handguns and short-barreled rifles, which are semi-automatic, and almost all of those are now prohibited or inacquirable. Take those 2 classes, you pay money, you send your application to the RCMP. They will take anywhere between a few months to a year or more to get you your license after they do a background check, and then you can go and buy your firearms with your license. Once you have your license, it's a very easy system, and it's really honestly not that bad. Of course, it's not like the United States. We don't have a right to firearms, so a licensing system is what we have, and what we likely always will have. It's what everywhere else in the world has except the United States, so that's not going to change. And the process has become a lot less painless in the recent years, ironically, under this government. They've switched to a lot of online applications, which is so much easier than having to physically send in your application by snail mail and hope they receive it. It was a really stupid process. Now that's gone. You can apply online. You still have to take the classes in person, but you can just scan those documents that you passed the class and send them online. If you want to sign up for a PAL class, if you're in Canada, simply Google PAL course near you and see what pops up. There's a whole bunch of local PAL courses that might not come up in a Google search. So if you want to find maybe the best instructor, go to a local gun store and just ask. Ask who they recommend to teach a PAL course and go sign up. So that is it for this video. I think this is going to be the last video that I make on the ban. It was kind of just clearing up some miscommunication and some questions that were had in the last video. And from here on out, it should just be reviews and the year-end videos and things like that. The next politics video I make will probably end up being whatever gets banned in February or March. So, between now and then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy all the other content that I normally make, and have a good day.